When the young girls were ready, they would take their feet, then they would take the 4 small toes, leaving the big toes alone, and wrap them under the foot, wrapping it with a bandage.
Our feet are extremely sensitive, and when we look throughout history, we see a lot of examples of people using that to their benefit for evil. From different painful practices to a lot of different foot torture devices. On today's list, I'll be covering some of the most cursed foot items that should have never been made. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have cement shoes. Cement shoes are basically exactly what they sound like and were apparently invented by the American mafia as a way to execute people. This is a pretty evil way of taking someone's life, not that there's any good or nice way to do that. They would place the victim's feet in cinder blocks that would then be filled with wet cement. Once the cement hardened, of course the victim would be unable to remove or even move their feet. The victim would then be put into some kind of body of water, and since they cannot swim and the concrete is heavy, they would sink to the bottom. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Spanish boot. The Spanish boot is a torture device that was an iron casing that went around the leg and foot. There was a screw attachment on the side that would be used to compress the leg. Sometimes the boot would be heated up before being placed on the person so as to burn them, but sometimes it would be heated as they were wearing it during the questioning period. If the screw was tightened, it would obviously begin to crush the leg and the foot and eventually the bones. In our number 8 spot today, we have a buskin. A buskin was created by the Scottish and was made out of a kind of boot-shaped raw hide that was soaked in water. When they wanted to torture somebody, they would place the wet, spongy buskin around your foot and leg and then place you in front of a burning fire. The leather would contract around the foot and leg and would lead to dislocation of the ankle. This wouldn't have caused enough pressure to actually crush the bones, but I feel like dislocation would be more than enough for me personally. In our number 7 spot today, we have Lotus shoes or arched shoes. The shoes themselves aren't extremely cursed, but it's the practice that leads to the shoes that is the uncomfortable part. Foot binding was a Chinese custom that was outlawed in 1912. Young girls would have their feet broken and bound in order to change the size and shape of their feet and keep them small. The binding of feet was actually a status symbol and a mark of beauty, but of course it was incredibly painful and unfair. Women were then given lotus shoes to wear, which were cone-shaped and intended to resemble a lotus bud. The shoes are so small that they could fit in the palm of your hand, and this is how small women's feet were after being bound. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Pikat, or the Pikat. I'm not sure. The Pikat, whatever it is, the Pikat comes from the days of the British Empire when armies were living in tents and camps. A tall post would be put into the ground with a hook attached at the top. A soldier would have their wrist attached to the hook and be standing on a stool next to the post. Then a stake would be driven into the ground next to him with a spiky part in the air. The stool would then be removed, causing the soldier to have to stand on the spike with their bare foot. Eventually, they would be forced to switch feet to ensure that the most damage was done. There was one record of a similar thing happening in Trinidad in 1801, where a woman had to balance on a large spike while she was suspended by her wrists. In our number 5 spot today, we have a goat. This is more of a weird practice than an item because a goat is an animal, but I really had to include this one on the list today. This form of torture comes from medieval France and begins with the victim being tied to a bench while their feet are bathed in salt water. After their feet were nice and salty, a goat would be brought to them and allowed to lick their feet. This weird practice doesn't sound as bad as others on this list at first, but goats have very rough tongues. Our feet have really sensitive soles, and the rough tongue of the goat could do some serious damage. Sometimes the goats would even bite the feet and maybe even bit off a toe every once in a while. In our number 4 spot today, we have Brothakins. Brothakins were when a victim would be seated on a bench and had boards placed on either side of the legs, and then both legs in their casings were bound together with a strong rope. After this, wedges of wood or metal would be wedged between the boards in the center, which would cause excruciating pain for the victim. There were different levels during the Brothakins. For just normal torture, whatever that is, there'd be 4 different wedges put in between the center boards. But for extreme cases, there would be 8 different wedges. Between the rope digging into the flesh and the fracturing of the bones, this was extremely painful. In our number 3 spot today, we have Keqing. The Keqing originated in China and was used on men in order to force confessions without putting their lives in danger. The Keqing consisted of 3 boards connected to the foot by a rope. The boards could either be snapped open and closed, or they could gradually be tightened, restricting the foot. At first, the boards would be smacked against the victim's feet and ankle, which truly sounds bad enough, but eventually the torture would progress. The sticks would then be squeezed so that the heel was compressing into the foot, which truly sounds unbearable. In our number 2 spot today, we have Keqing. The Keqing originated in India and was made of wood. The Keqing was sometimes used on other sensitive parts of the body, but mainly the feet. The feet would be placed between 2 wooden plates and squeezed until it was unbearable. Sometimes the person inflicting the pain would stand on top of the plate, or sometimes they would put extremely heavy stones on the top and leave the person there for long periods of time. They sometimes never regained the ability to walk again, and most would never be able to walk normally without pain again. In our number 1 spot today, we have high boots. High boots originated in France and are similar to the Buskin, but in my opinion, are even worse. High boots were made of porous leather and were of course in a boot shape. These leather boots would be placed over the feet and legs of the victim, and then hot water would either be poured over the leather so as to soak through and begin eating at the flesh of the trapped limbs, or the boiling water would be poured directly into the boots so as to basically cook the flesh, which is pretty gross and horrifying. Eventually, places that used high boots ended up switching out the boiling water for melted resin. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've been your host, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!